The global stand-up comedy industry is now worth over $4 billion annually. That is not a joke. That is an economy built entirely on laughter, timing, and the courage to stand alone on a stage with a microphone. Stand-up comedy went from smoky bars and civil rights-era clubs to billion-dollar Netflix deals and sold-out stadium tours. And the path it took to get there is stranger, more political, and more revolutionary than most people realize. In the next 10 minutes, you will learn exactly how a uniquely American art form conquered the entire planet, which moments changed everything, and the one shift in the industry that most people completely overlook, one that quietly transformed comedy from a performance into a product. Let us get into it. Background: stand-up comedy as a formal art form traces its roots to the mid-19th century in the United States. Before it had a name, it existed in vaudeville theaters, minstrel shows, and traveling circus acts. Performers would step forward from ensemble casts and address the audience directly, mixing jokes with observations about everyday life. The format was raw, unstructured, and deeply tied to the social tensions of the time. By the 1920s and 1930s, radio changed everything. Comedians who could hold attention with only their voice, no props, no costumes, no ensemble, became nationally famous overnight. Jack Benny and Bob Hope mastered this stripped-down format, and in doing so, they accidentally defined what stand-up would eventually become: one person, one voice, one perspective holding an audience completely hostage. Then came the 1950s and 1960s, and something seismic happened. Lenny Bruce, Dick Gregory, and Richard Pryor did not just tell jokes. They used comedy as a weapon. They talked about race, politics, religion, and sexuality at a time when those topics were genuinely dangerous to discuss in public. Lenny Bruce was arrested multiple times for obscenity. Dick Gregory performed for civil rights activists and became one of the most important voices of the movement. What they proved was that stand-up comedy could carry real weight. It was not just entertainment. It was commentary. It was truth-telling with a punchline attached. Main content: the 1970s saw stand-up explode into mainstream American culture. Comedy clubs like the Comedy Store in Los Angeles and Caroline's in New York became launching pads for household names. Johnny Carson's Tonight Show became the single most important platform for comedians in the country. A great set on Carson could transform an unknown comic into a star within a single night. This created an ecosystem where talent could rise quickly, but the industry was still almost entirely concentrated in New York and Los Angeles. The real commercial turning point came in the 1980s. HBO began airing stand-up specials, and the format proved to be enormously popular television. Eddie Murphy's 1983 special Delirious became a cultural phenomenon, selling millions of home video copies and proving that a solo comedian performing live could compete with Hollywood blockbusters for audience attention. This was the moment the industry started thinking about scale. Cable television amplified everything. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, channels dedicated to comedy, late-night shows, and syndicated stand-up programming had turned comedy into a genuine career path for hundreds of performers. The comedy club boom of the 1980s saw clubs open in every major American city, and then in smaller cities, and then in suburban malls. At its peak, there were over 300 comedy clubs operating across the United States simultaneously. Here is what nobody talks about when it comes to this era. The comedy club boom also created the first industrial infrastructure around stand-up. Booking agents, managers, touring circuits, merchandise, album deals, the business architecture that surrounds music had now been built around comedy. Stand-up was no longer just a performance. It was a commodity that could be packaged, distributed, and monetized at scale. Now here is where the story gets genuinely global. American stand-up had dominated the format for decades, but by the 1990s and early 2000s, something interesting was happening in the United Kingdom. British comedians had always had a strong tradition of observational humor and satire, but the stand-up club scene began mirroring the American model with increasing precision. The Edinburgh Festival Fringe became the most important comedy showcase in the world outside of America, launching careers like those of Peter Kay, Lee Evans, and later, Ricky Gervais and Michael McIntyre, who would each go on to sell out arenas across Europe. The Arena Comedy Show, a comedian performing for 20,000 people at a time, became uniquely powerful in the UK. Michael McIntyre's 2012 tour grossed over $21 million, making it one of the highest-grossing comedy tours in history at that point. The numbers were comparable to major music artists. This was a turning point in how the entertainment industry perceived stand-up as an economic vehicle. Meanwhile, stand-up was quietly developing roots in Australia, Canada, and India. The Indian comedy scene deserves particular attention. For most of the 20th century, humor in India was embedded in film, television, and theatrical traditions. But the early 2000s saw a wave of English-language comedians in Mumbai and Delhi who were directly influenced by American stand-up. Platforms like YouTube allowed performers like Veer Das and AIB to build massive audiences without traditional gatekeepers. When Netflix launched aggressively in India in 2016, stand-up specials were among its most streamed content categories in the country almost immediately. This points to the single most transformative force in the globalization of stand-up comedy: streaming. Netflix did not just distribute comedy. It industrialized it on a planetary scale. Between 2017 and 2022, Netflix invested an estimated $500 million in stand-up comedy content. Dave Chappelle's deal for a series of specials was reportedly worth $60 million. Chris Rock renegotiated his deal and received a reported $40 million per special. These are not entertainment figures. These are the kind of numbers associated with major film productions. Deep dive: what Netflix understood, and what made this investment rational rather than reckless, was that stand-up comedy is extraordinarily cheap to produce relative to scripted television or film. A stand-up special requires a venue, a camera crew, an audience, and a comedian. The production cost for even a premium special rarely exceeds $2 million. When you are paying a comedian $40 million, you are not paying for production. You are paying for the guaranteed audience that comedian brings. It is pure brand acquisition. This economic logic also explains why the industry became so stratified. The top 20 comedians in the world have become extraordinarily wealthy. Everyone below that tier is still largely navigating the same grind that comedians faced in 1985. The streaming era created billboards for comedy but concentrated the financial rewards at the very top of the pyramid. Something else happened as stand-up went global that fundamentally changed the craft itself. Comedians now perform for audiences who may have watched every special they have ever released before stepping into the venue. The idea of having a traveling hour that you perform city to city for 2 years, the traditional model, broke down. The internet meant material could become globally exposed within 24 hours. This forced comedians to create new material at a pace the industry had never seen before, compressing creative cycles dramatically. Analysis: the globalization of stand-up comedy also exposed how deeply cultural and context-specific humor actually is. When American specials played in South Korea, Japan, or Brazil, they performed unevenly. This created an opening for local stand-up scenes to develop with genuine commercial momentum. South Korean comedy festivals now draw international attention. Brazilian comedians like Fabio Porchat and Porta dos Fundos have built audiences numbering in the tens of millions. The global industry is no longer American comedy exported worldwide. It is a genuinely decentralized network of local scenes connected by shared platforms. The industry also found new revenue streams that did not exist a decade ago. Podcast networks, live event touring companies, merchandise, corporate engagements, and social media monetization have created diversified income structures. A mid-tier comedian today can build a sustainable career without ever landing a major television deal, something that was essentially impossible before 2010. Conclusion: stand-up comedy began as one person telling uncomfortable truths to a small room of people. Before you go, if you learned something valuable today, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to BuzzCore for a brand new video every single day. We will see you in the next one.